Michael B. Jordan cried on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, and it wasn't some viral clip engineered for social media. It was raw, quiet, and almost too real for late-night television. It happened about 15 minutes into the interview, right after the laughter had settled from a story about his childhood dog stealing a Thanksgiving turkey, and the audience had leaned back into their seats, trusting the rhythm of celebrity banter, when Stephen, in that disarmingly gentle way of his, asked a question that wasn't even controversial, just real. It was something like, when was the last time you felt like you failed someone you loved? And for a full 4 seconds, Michael said nothing, just blinked once, slowly, then shifted in his chair, cleared his throat like he might laugh it off, but didn't. And in that stretch of silence, something changed in the room, something you couldn't quite see, only feel, like a draft from a door slightly ajar where there shouldn't be one. And Stephen seemed to sense it too, his face still smiling, but subtly pulled back. Uncertain, almost childlike in the way he tilted his head slightly, as if to say, "You okay?" But Michael wasn't, not really, and though he tried to start a sentence, his voice caught on the first syllable, and whatever mask he'd brought with him crumbled under the weight of that one question. And there it was, clear as day. His eyes glassed over, and one tear slid down before he could stop it. And it wasn't dramatic or noisy, or even that visible to most of the audience yet, but it stopped the show in its tracks. Not with a bang, but a hush, and Stephen, clearly unsure if he should move on or lean in, just sat there, hands clasped in his lap, waiting, and for a moment Michael looked up at him, like a man realizing something in real time, something he hadn't prepared for, and he managed to whisper something almost inaudible that only the microphones caught. But not yet, not all of it, because he wasn't ready, and neither were we. Then he cried, really cried. Not the tight, actor-trained kind of emotion that flickers just enough to stir sympathy without losing composure, but something deeper and less rehearsed, something that visibly rattled the room. It came with no warning, just a sudden collapse of restraint, as Michael B. Jordan sat frozen in his chair on national television, his shoulders rising with a breath he couldn't release, and for a long moment the audience, the crew, even Stephen Colbert himself didn't move, as if waiting for the cue that would make this okay again. But it didn't come, and the silence thickened until Stephen, still trying to steer the ship but clearly shaken, gently asked what had happened. His voice soft but uncertain, as though he already feared the answer, and Michael, eyes wet and unfocused, didn't look at him at first but finally murmured, "Your question pierced me." And the way he said it made it clear that this wasn't about the show or the cameras or even the moment. It was about something older, heavier, something he hadn't spoken about in years, if ever, and Stephen, visibly stricken, leaned forward instinctively, already apologizing, saying he never intended to hurt or pry, that it was just a question. But Michael shook his head slowly, almost kindly, and said, "I need a second," before standing up and walking off stage. Not dramatically, not storming out, just walking like a man who realized too late that his armor wasn't holding. And as he disappeared behind the curtain, the band didn't play and the lights didn't change, and Stephen sat in that strange middle space between concern and confusion. Then glanced off stage, muttered something to the crew, and after a beat stood and followed him. Not because he had to, but because you could tell he felt responsible, and what followed backstage wasn't meant to be seen or heard by an audience, but it happened. Stephen caught up with him in the hallway outside the dressing rooms, where Michael was leaning against the wall, hands on his knees, breathing like someone trying not to fall apart completely. And Stephen stopped a few feet away and said quietly, "I didn't know it would be that tender for you." And Michael straightened, wiped his face with both hands, then looked at him, red-eyed but composed enough to speak, and said, "I know. It's not you. It's just been building for a while. I didn't know it would break here." And the simplicity of that hit harder than anything else, because it wasn't about some grand tragedy or a headline-worthy secret, but about the way pain collects in places you don't expect, how it waits, dormant, until something mundane, a question, a tone, a name, opens the floodgates, and Stephen, now visibly unsure whether to offer a hand or space, just nodded and said, "Do you want to go back out there?" And Michael didn't answer right away, just stood there, breathing, trying to piece himself together without rushing it. And finally he exhaled and said, "Yeah, let's finish it." So they returned, both quieter than before but walking with a kind of mutual understanding, and when they stepped back on stage, the applause was hesitant, unsure if cheering was appropriate, but they sat down again, and Stephen offered a soft joke about needing more commercial breaks, which drew a few relieved laughs, and then he gently asked if Michael wanted to say anything about what had just happened. And Michael paused, then said, "Sometimes things just hit you. I'm good now. Let's talk about something else." And the show carried on. Not quite the same, but not broken either. In fact, somehow more real than anything else that night. And after the taping ended, the segment was edited lightly, the moment kept intact but bookended with enough context to protect him. And when the show aired, it became the kind of moment that people don't scroll past. The kind they sit with, share quietly, and revisit days later. Not because it was dramatic, but because it reminded them that even the most composed among us carry things we're not ready to talk about. And sometimes it takes the wrong moment to finally let them out. And the world doesn't end when that happens. It just shifts a little, becomes softer, quieter, more human. And somewhere, without cameras or lights, someone who saw it whispered, "I've felt that too." And that was enough. It took him a few minutes, but Michael eventually calmed enough to rejoin Stephen on the stage, and the energy when they returned was different. Not uncomfortable exactly, but more alert, more present, like the entire room had collectively agreed to stop pretending and just feel whatever was real in the moment. And when they sat down again, Stephen gave him a subtle nod. No forced jokes this time, just a silent cue that he could say something if he wanted or move on if he didn't. And Michael, taking a breath, looking around at the audience, the cameras, the lights, said with a half smile, "I'm good now, just one of those moments. Happens to all of us, right?" And though he said it lightly, you could tell it was still sitting in his chest, not fully processed, not gone, but he was willing to move forward, and Stephen, always tuned into the shifts in the room, didn't pry or circle back, just let the air settle and transition gently into another topic. Something about Michael's upcoming project. And the conversation picked up again, not quite as fast, not quite as glossy, but steadier. Like two people walking side by side after an unexpected detour, not sure what just happened, but respecting each other enough to keep walking. And for the next 10 minutes, they talked about his role, his preparation, what it was like directing for the second time, and at some point, Michael even laughed. Genuinely, not the performative chuckle you give for a story you've told 10 times, but a full laugh that caught him off guard and made Stephen smile with relief, and the audience laughed too, maybe a bit louder than they normally would, like they were grateful for the release, like they'd all been holding something in together and could finally let it out. And when the interview started to wind down, Stephen asked the standard wrap-up question. Something simple like what was next, or what was he looking forward to? And Michael paused, looked out at the audience again, then back at Stephen and said quietly, honestly, just breathing a little easier. And though the line didn't land like a punchline, it did something better. It resonated, and the way he said it made it feel like he meant it, not just for himself, but for everyone watching, and as they stood up and shook hands to close the segment, there was something unusually sincere about it. Something that said, we didn't plan that, and it's okay that it happened. And after the cameras cut and the credits rolled, Michael leaned in and thanked Stephen for the space, for not pushing, and Stephen thanked him back, said something about how we all carry stuff we don't know how to name. And Michael nodded, didn't add anything more, just gave him a pat on the shoulder and walked off stage. Not rushed, not shaken anymore, just quiet and thoughtful. And in the hallway, someone from the crew said something about reshooting part of it if he wanted, and Michael said no, let it stay. People should see it like it was. And later that night, when the show aired, the moment came and went without any flashy transitions or slow piano music, just the footage, unvarnished, and viewers didn't flip away or skip it. They watched, then watched again, and it became the kind of segment people didn't talk about loudly but mentioned in hushed tones the next day, like it meant something they couldn't quite explain, and somewhere in the middle of that, people started to understand that vulnerability didn't have to come with a headline. That sometimes a man breaking down for no obvious reason is the story itself. And as the episode faded to black and Stephen thanked his guest one last time,